this is Dorothy here again. I'm just going to give you a story today of something that took place in my life. It was very exciting, and it was actually 80 years ago from today, and I'm remembering this word for word. I don't have any script, so bear with me if I'm a little hesitant at times. But I was 9.5 and my sister Elizabeth was 7. And my ever-adventurous mother and father decided to take us on a holiday to France. But at that time, 80 years ago, first of all, you could only take £5 per person out of the country when you went on holidays, which made it very, very difficult for anybody to go abroad because £5 per head wouldn't get you a lot of accommodation. But anyway, my mother overcame that, and I'll explain shortly how. They also planned to go down to Cove in Cork and to pick up an American liner coming in from the States, dropping people off at Cove and going on to Le Havre in France, where you get a train or a bus down to Paris. So it meant we had to overnight in Cove. It was quite a long journey down, and the line we were travelling on was the White Star Line, and the name of the ship we were going to travel on was the SS America, and it had just come off duty during the war, because at this stage the war was over just a year. So it had been refitted for taking passengers, and it was a beautiful, massive, big luxury liner. So you got the luck of the draw when you got on, whether you got a suite or a good double cabin or what you got. It depended on what they had in Cove when the people got off. So anyway, we drove down from 6 in the evening, arrived at Cove, got into a White Star guest house near the port, and got to bed. But unfortunately there were other people travelling, and they were in the room beside us, and they must have been celebrating all night, whether they were going home from holidays here or whether they were Irish people emigrating, I don't know, but they made a lot of noise, so we didn't get much sleep. But we had to get up at 6 o'clock the next morning to take the ferry out to the big boat. So we went down. So there was my mum and dad, my mum's sister, Auntie Annie, and her husband Billy, and Michael Byrne, my first cousin, and Elizabeth and myself and mummy and daddy. So down we went anyway to get on this, the tender it was called, not a ferry. So we got onto this tender, and I thought, this is a huge boat. But I realised why it was so big, because as we got out into the bay towards Crosshaven in Cove, we could see this massive, massive ship moored out in the bay waiting for us. It was such a big ship that it couldn't come into the port. The port wouldn't have accommodated the depth of the, whatever you call the thing on the bottom. I'm sorry, I can't remember. But anyway, so there it was. And as we got closer, I'm looking up, it was like looking up at a mountain. And I thought, how are we going to climb up to the top of this? But of course, as we got nearer, they opened a sort of a hatch on a lower deck, and they put out these stairs and gangway. So we got off with great assistance from the crew, and the excitement at this stage was absolutely boiling over. So anyway, they helped us on board, and we were absolutely amazed. It was like going into a big town. So we were escorted up after checking in to our cabin, which happened to be a magnificent suite. We were one of the lucky ones that got the good choice. Anyway, so the excitement was absolutely running at a very high level, and we had to control ourselves, this little 7 and 9.5-year-old. Anyway, we had a few little blips getting on because we had to go through customs, and Elizabeth, as I say, was 7, and she was complaining madly that her tweed skirt was hurting her legs down at the hem. So Mummy was very agitated to keep her quiet, and she says, stop. And I said, Mum, why is Mummy being so cross? I didn't realise that she had sewn in quite a good few dollars rolled up into Elizabeth's hem, because we wouldn't be allowed to take it out of the country, and she must have got it from some clients in the shop. So anyway, we got through that and nothing happened. So anyway, we went up to this beautiful big suite, and I said, oh, wouldn't it be lovely if we got something to eat? I wonder what sort of food they have. So anyway, we decided we'd go down to the restaurant. Oh my goodness, the menu. There was items I'd never seen the like of before on. And of course, it was breakfast time because we were very early. So they had a huge cereal menu with things like Rice Krispies, which you'd never heard of, you see. This is after the war in Ireland, and all those years, and none of those products could come in. So I went, studied the list up and down very intently, and hit on something that looked very exotic. So I said to the waiter, I'll have Indian corn, please. Well, you can imagine the look on my face when he arrived with a bowl of porridge. Oh, that was my absolute dread, because we used to be made eat porridge as a child. Good for you. So anyway, meals took off after that. Everything was fabulous, and the amount of fruit. And bear in mind, we had no bananas or oranges or grapes or anything like that. I hadn't seen them because the war had started in 1935, 36, I think it was, to 45, or 39. So I would only been about coming on to food when the war started, off the bottle. So anyway, oh my goodness, this food was just unbelievable choice. We had stuff that we didn't even know the name of. But then on the first night out, we had a very bad storm, and I had ordered some kind of chicken, and the next thing, the ship rolled to one side, and I found myself with, it looked like a steak. Somebody's plate from Mummy or Daddy's plate had rolled right down. So I found myself with the wrong menu, which caused an awful lot of laughter. We were all roaring, laughing at the good of what we were now eating. Anyway, the ship was magnificently equipped, and there was a gym. And I remember going in, and there were very stout ladies using this belt that they sort of lay back into, and it was banging from side to side and obviously kind of emulsifying the fat. Oh, I thought, what a great idea. Now I'm 9. So anyway, we arrived the next morning in Le Havre about, I think it must have been not morning, but afternoon, about 4 o'clock. And so we got off, and great excitement. You could even smell the difference because of I suppose the Galway cigarettes smelled much different to what you'd get in Ireland. And then it was a bit warmer, and so we decided we had booked on a train down to Paris. So on the first 10 or 15 minutes on the train, we had a bit of coastline view. And I remember Daddy telling me that the Battle of Britain had taken place on the Normandy coast. And the French had surrendered in Paris, so that Paris was left untouched. So the whole war really the worst part of it took place on this coastline that we're now passing on a train. So I'm standing at a window because it's a long corridor, and I'm noticing, I'm talking into Mummy and Daddy and Elizabeth, and I noticed that the people were very unfriendly. And I was wondering, why do they not like us, or what's wrong? So anyway, I'm looking out at all this destruction, and rocks piled high and buildings knocked down, and it was absolutely dreadful. So anyway, I said to Daddy, why are the people looking so strangely at us? And he said, oh, they think we're English. And I said, and what's that got to do with what's happening? And he said, well, the English fought the Battle of Britain on this Normandy coast, and there was a fierce lot of destruction. Now it brought the war to an end, but in the meantime there was a terrible lot of damage. So I said, oh, and they think we're English. And Daddy said, yeah, obviously you were speaking English. So I got a great brainwave, and I'd had a year's oral French from a girl called Evelyn Hennessy, who had come over to do time in Ireland to perfect her English. And I was in the boarding school at that stage. I just had my first year, and she was teaching us conversational French. So I looked at the man beside me and I said to him, "Nous sommes Irlandais." We are Irish. Well, his face changed and he broke out into a big smile, and he was telling all the people around, "Irlandais, Irlandais." And Daddy said, "What in the name of God did you say?" Because he didn't speak French. So I said, "Oh, I just told him we were Irish." So my parents were massively impressed that, my God, our 9-year-old is budding genius. But there was more to come when we landed in Paris, and they couldn't ask for the milk for their coffee. And I said, "Oh, coffee au lait. Lait is milk." And Eden ordered Daddy's beer for him, the beer. So anyway, all in all, it was a very exciting arrival in Paris, and we were booked into this hotel in a little place called the Cité Bergère. Now, it was a little city within Paris, just with a couple of buildings and a theatre on the bottom, which turned out to be the Folie Bergère, where the ladies did the can-can and kicking their legs up, and not very suitable for children. Anyway, the reason we were there was, in this hotel, the gentleman who owned it had been in Dublin a couple of years earlier, and he called into our shop in Henry Street. It was called McDonald's of Henry Street. Mary Street, really, but it was on Henry Street. And he said he had a son in Trinity, and he knew one of our staff who had been working with us, and she was a kind of a referee for him, reference. So he said, "I'm having terrible difficulty sending money over to my son for his keep in Ireland. He's studying in Trinity. So if he could come into you every week and collect some money, and then you keep a note and I'll keep a note, and you come out to Paris and I will credit you then all this credit for your hotel charge." So that was a brilliant idea. I only found this out years later now. I didn't know this at the time, because, as I said, you were allowed £5 per person. So anyway, it meant that we had great comfort and, plenty of money, and everything was grand. But Elizabeth and I and Michael Byrne discovered Coca-Cola. Now, this was an absolute excitement. We'd never seen or heard anything like it. So there was a drought on, and it was very, very hot in Paris. So we were very thirsty. So every time the parents and Auntie Annie and Uncle Billy would take us into a restaurant or a bar, we'd all ordered our Coca-Cola. Well, the consternation from Mummy and Daddy was that the Coca-Cola per bottle cost double what their drink, say wine or a brandy, cost. So they were doing their best to dissuade us, but no, nothing daunted. We kept up our demands for Coke. Then, with the heat wave, typhoid broke out on the Seine River, and we couldn't swim because there are swimming pools on the Seine at the side, kind of hived off. So we were very hot and very moany. So I don't think we made life very pleasant for Mummy and Daddy. Anyway, we still devoured our Coke and did a lot of sightseeing. Went up the Eiffel Tower, went to see Montmartre and Notre Dame Cathedral. So all in all, it was a beautiful visit to Paris. And being so young, I don't think there were any other children in Ireland who would have been doing holidays like that in 1946. So that was our holiday to Paris. And Daddy at one stage decided he wanted to go to the races in Longchamp. So he headed off looking for the races. And of course he didn't have any French, and they didn't speak any English at all at that stage, whether deliberate or, whatever reason, I don't know. But anyway, hours later, we're strolling around part of the city, and we bump into Daddy, and he's walking looking very forlorn. Lost his way going to the races, couldn't find his way to get back. But what a coincidence that we should run into him right in the middle of Paris. So that was just another adventure. Then the hotel, as I say, was over the Folies Bergère Theatre. So one afternoon, Michael Byrne and I, always looking for mischief, decided we'd go down and see what was going on. There was a lot of music coming out of this theatre. So we went in anyway, and we sat down. The door was open and we sat down at the back. And all these girls were up on the stage and were all kicking their legs up, and they had little can dresses on them. And it was all very strange. I'd never seen anything like this before. And the next thing, I felt a hand at the back of my neck pulling me out. My father had discovered that we had discovered the Folies Bergère rehearsing. So he made short shrift to that, and we weren't allowed in again. But then there was another problem. Michael Byrne was very prone to sleepwalking. And there was little balconies outside our bedrooms. And one night, they're coming home from having a little excursion out, the two sets of parents, and they look up, and there is Michael standing in a diving position on the 4th floor. So they had to fly up the stairs, sneak in nice and quietly, and just take him from behind, not to frighten him, because apparently when you're sleepwalking, it's very, very dangerous to wake you suddenly, I believe. So that was just a little bit of added excitement. And then we saw all the beautiful sights of Paris. And we also went to St. Teresa's burial. I think it was Lisieux. This was the little flower, St. Teresa. And her body was preserved. So we went in, and it was absolutely beautiful, and we said a few prayers. And she's a little flower, she was known as. So that was one lovely memory I had. The food was very strange, and we got this steak, and it had a very strong sort of flavour. Now, we were only having a small amount of it, but I discovered after I had struggled to chew some of it, it was actually horse meat we were eating, because this is, remember, a year after the war, and produce hadn't got back to normal supplies, so you just wouldn't know what you were going to be served. But I will never forget that strong flavoured steak. Nearly put me off for life, but it didn't. Anyway, the weather, as I say, was very warm, and we did a bit of touring around, but it was a very memorable holiday, but it was very exhausting at our age, 9 and 7. And I'm sure we didn't make life very easy for the parents who were trying to keep us occupied. But it was an experience, and something I'm thinking about now without notes or anything else. And now I'm 89 and a half, so it's exactly 80 years ago today that we went. So that's the end of that little podcast, but I will think of some more interesting ones. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you. Bye-bye.